Welcome to this YSL tutorial. In this short video, we're going to look at how you can use the find and FindNext methods in Excel VBA. We'll begin the video with a quick look at how you can apply the basic find method to a range of cells to find a simple string of text. We'll explain a couple of the simple tweaks you can make to the way the find method works. So for example, you can make your searches case sensitive. You can also switch between finding whole words and partial words. We'll also investigate how you can deal with failed finds, so when your find method doesn't return any results, how you can avoid seeing runtime error messages using object variables and if statements. We'll spend a little bit of time creating a basic search system that makes it easy for an end user to interact with, and then the final part of the video will be used to investigate the FindNext method so that you can find all the instances of a value in a range. That's a little bit more complex. It's going to involve using loops and a couple of extra variables, but it's well worth seeing how that works. So let's get started. Let's start the video by explaining the basics of how the find method works. What we'll do is write a simple routine which is going to try to find a particular film in this list. I'm going to suggest TED because it's the shortest one to type. And all that's going to happen is that when the routine finds the film, it's going to select the cell containing that word. So let's head into the VBA editor to begin with. And I've actually already started with a module in there, the find method. And in here we're going to begin a quick subroutine which I'm going to call find at film. Now the first thing that you need to specify when you're trying to use the find method is which range of cells you're trying to find something in. So if I quickly switch back into Excel for a moment, hopefully you can see here that the range of cells we're trying to look in is cells B3 to B15. Those are the cells that contain the various film names. So that's what I'm going to do in a quick, simple fashion. The first line of code, first bit of code I'm going to write is going to refer to range B3 to B15 just directly by cell reference. We'll make this a bit more dynamic and flexible later on in the video. If I enter a full stop now, I can look for the find method, and then open a set of round brackets or parentheses, and see the list of arguments that we have to fill in. Now technically there's only one compulsory parameter for the find method, and it's the what parameter. This is simply what it is you're looking for. So for us it's the string of text, TED. Now there are lots and lots of other parameters I can fill in at this point, but I'm going to leave these out for now. All I'd like to look at before I close the parentheses is the fact that the find method returns a reference to a range object. So if I close the parentheses and then type in a full stop, the list of methods and properties I see are members of a range object. So what I want to do is simply select the thing that I'm looking for. So there we go, there's a nice simple procedure just to demonstrate how the find method works. Let's restore down the window so we can see what's going on in the background, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to run or step through this routine so that we can see what's happening. And what I'm hoping will happen is that cell B11 will become selected. That's the one that contains the word TED. So if I use the F8 key to begin stepping through, when I hit the F8 key on this line, I'll be a little bit disappointed. Let me just F8 to make sure that the subroutine ends. I've actually selected the Hobbit rather than TED. And the reason that's happened is because somewhere in the text in this cell is the three letters T-E-D, TED. So hopefully that demonstrates two quick, important things about the way the find method works by default. First of all, it's not case sensitive. So I've entered a capital T here, and yet I've found a lowercase t in the word TED here. And also, that by default, the find method doesn't search for whole words. It will find the text you've typed in anywhere within the string in a cell. So let's go back to the VB editor now, and let's see how we can modify those two things. Let's first of all try to make this search case sensitive. To make the find method case sensitive, we need to specify one of its other parameters. So if I just click just after the argument I've passed into the what parameter and type in a comma, you can see the tooltip appears and shows me the list of other parameters available. Now the one that I want is this one over here called match case, and one way to get to the match case parameter is to continue typing in commas and wait until the match case parameter turns bold. So I'll get there eventually. There it is, match case, and if I say true, that will make that particular search, that particular find, case sensitive. Now that's a bit of a mess when you look at that and try to read it back later on, particularly for somebody else trying to read what your code means. So rather than using lots and lots and lots of different commas, what I prefer to do is name the parameters. So this means that I will need to name both parameters. So in front of the word TED, what I need to do is specify that the parameter that's being passed into is the what parameter. So I do that with the word what, followed by a colon and an equal sign. I will then need one comma to move on to a different parameter. And in fact, if I just backspace the word true in the comma for the moment, so you can see what happens here. If I type in a comma now, you can see that none of the other parameter names are highlighted in bold. So this means that I can specify any other parameter that I like. So I do that by saying, in this case, match case, colon equals, and now I'm going to put in the word true, or the value true, and that will make the match case parameter true. So if I restore down the window again so we can see what's happening in the background, and once again, if I click into cell A1 to begin with, bring back the VB editor and use F8 to step through the routine. When I execute this line this time, because I'm looking for the word TED with a capital T, hopefully, unsurprisingly, this time I do get the word TED with the capital T selected. So that's how to make a search or a find case sensitive. Now, earlier we saw that the find method also returns partial matches. So when we search for the word TED, it actually returned the cell containing the Hobbit because the word TED was part of another larger word in that piece of text. What you can also do is make the find method only find whole words. So let's just do a quick little test here. What I'm going to do is insert a new row, which can have the TED sequel, TED2, which I think they're making it, but it's not out yet. Anyway, let's pretend it was out. So I'm going to search for the word TED again, using my same find method. Let's just switch back to cell A1 to begin with. And with the VB editor on display, if I step through this routine using the F8 key, we should see that it searches and finds TED2. And the reason it does that is because of the default order that the find method works in. It works from top to bottom in the range of cells you're looking in. Well, technically actually left to right and then top to bottom. So if I was searching in this entire list, it would go across and then down. So anyway, it's always going to find TED2 before TED. So what I want to do is make sure that my find method works so that it only finds whole words. And again, that involves using one of the other parameters of the find method. So if I type in a comma here, the parameter that I want to use is called lookat. So I use the lookat parameter followed by a colon and an equal sign. Now, sadly, this isn't quite as simple as saying true or false as match cases. The lookat parameter actually requires one of two special Excel constants, which unfortunately you don't see what those values actually are. The acceptable values aren't displayed. So as a quick way to find out what the acceptable values for the lookat parameter are, you could click on the find keyword and press the F1 key on your keyboard. And what that will do is try to launch the context-sensitive help page in Excel. Actually, because I'm connected to the internet, it actually brings up the MSDN page. So anyway, here we are. Here's the list of parameters for the range find method. So the lookat parameter, hopefully here as you can see, can be one of the following Excel lookat constants. Excuse me for that. Excel whole or Excel part. So it should be fairly easy to work out from that the word Excel whole will find whole words. So let me close down the help page and go back to the VB editor. So I'm going to make lookat equal to Excel whole. There it is. And then let's run the search again, starting in cell A1, and then using the F8 key to step through the routine. This time what we should find is that the cell we select is the one containing just the word TED, not TED and anything else. So there's how to make sure that your searches work both case sensitively and only finding whole words. In all of our examples so far, we have been able to find a cell which contains the text we're looking for. But I want to see what happens now if we search for something which doesn't exist in our list. So let's change the what argument so that we're looking for a film called TED3, which definitely doesn't exist in our list. Let's then step through the routine using the F8 key and see what happens. Now ideally what would happen on this line, when it doesn't work, is I'd see a nice friendly message saying something like, there was no cell containing that text. Sadly what we see, though, in reality, is a horrible runtime error message instead. Object variable or with block variable not set. I'm just going to hit the end button here to end the routine. Now, technically the problem here isn't to do with the fact that the find method hasn't found what we're looking for. The real problem lies in the fact that we've immediately tried to select the cell returned by the find method. Now when the find method can't find a piece of text that we're looking for, it returns the value nothing, which is an intrinsic constant in VBA. You can't select nothing, so the problem here is to do with the select method. Here's the solution. Let's take the select method off the end of the result of the find method, which will actually result in a syntax error, just for the moment. And what we're going to do instead is we're going to declare a variable that's going to hold the result of the find method. So I'm going to call it film cell, And the type of thing it's going to store is a range, because we know that's the type of object that the find method returns. What we can then do in front of the find method itself, we can say set film cell equal to the result of using that find. Now, one of two things will result then when that line is executed. If I run it now and use F8 to step through, obviously nothing will actually happen, but the useful thing is that we don't see the runtime error message. What we need to do at this point then is test what the result of the find method is, so what value is currently stored in film cell. So we can do that using an if statement. So let's say if film cell, I'm going to test it currently if it's nothing, and we do that with a fairly unique syntax. If film cell is nothing, then I'll simply display a message box, I think, on screen saying no film was found, or no cell was found. Otherwise, else, we will select the cell contained in the film cell variable. So let's say film cell dot select end if, and then let's see, I'm going to drag the screen across to the right this time. So this time, if we search for TED3 again, using the F8 key to step through, and in fact, let me display the locals window as well so we can see this a little bit more clearly. View locals window. So when the routine first begins, film cell contains nothing. It's an uninitialized range variable. If I use the F8 key to execute this line, because I'm searching for TED3 which doesn't exist, film cell still has nothing in it. So when the if statement runs, it finds that film cell is nothing, it displays in the message box, no film was found, that's all fine. So let me just end that subroutine. Let's this time search for TED. Let's go for TED2, which has been found. We don't have that cell selected just yet. So if I use the F8 key to step through, now to begin with again, film cell has nothing stored in it. There's no reference. When I run this line this time, film cell now has a reference to a range object stored in it. So my if statement finds that film cell is not nothing, therefore it's going to select the cell containing the text we've looked for, TED2, and there we go. There's a reasonably robust way of using the find method to deal with what happens if you can't find what you're looking for. There are a few more simple things we can do to make this system a bit more user-friendly and a bit more robust. And the first thing I'd like to do is change how we're specifying which range of cells we're looking in. So currently it's only looking in cells B3 to B15. And in fact, one of the things I've done during the course of the video, having inserted a new row, means that one of our films now isn't being incorporated in the search range. So what I'd like to do instead is make it so that we search for always every cell from the top of the list, cell B3, to whichever cell happens to be at the bottom of the list, assuming there are no gaps in the list. So a quick simple way to do that is again using a variable. So I'm going to declare a new variable at the top of the routine, which I'm going to call dim search range as a range. And what I'm going to do is make sure that I set that search range equal to the range of cells I'm looking in. So I'm going to say set search range equal to range B3, so that's the top cell in the list, followed by a comma, and then I'm going to say range B2 dot end XL down. Now, I've dealt with how you refer to ranges in much more detail in a previous video, so I'm not going to explain this in too much detail, other than to say that range B3, hopefully obviously, is cell B3. Range B2.endXL down is equivalent to whichever cell happens to be at the bottom of the list from cell B2. So if I select cell B2 and then press Control on the keyboard, or hold down Control and press the down arrow key, the cell that I end up in is equivalent to the cell referred to by that string of text. So the whole thing altogether selects or refers to any cell between that one and all the cells in between. What that means that I can do now is, rather than set film cell equal to range B3 to B15, I can replace that with a reference to my variable called search range. And there it is. So that's the first improvement that I can make. The next improvement I can make is in how the user specifies what they're searching for, rather than, as we have been doing so far, coming into the VBA editor and modifying this text. We could actually use a simple input box to allow the user to specify what they're actually looking for. So let's have another variable at the top. Let's say, let's call this film name, and this will be a string. And we can set the string by using an input box. I'm going to say film name equals input box, and I'm going to specify that the prompt will be type in a film name. What I can then do is, instead of specifying that what is this literal string of text, I can replace that with a reference to my film name variable. I'm just going to do a couple of other quick tweaks. I'm going to make my match case parameter equal to false, and I'm going to set the look at parameter to XL part as well. So we're looking for non-case sensitive and partial matches again. Let me just close down the locals window so you can see the whole thing again. Last little quick thing we'll do, rather than just selecting the film cell, let's print out a little bit of information about it instead. So I'm going to remove that line altogether, and what I'm going to do instead is say message box, which will say film cell.value and was released on and film cell.offset 0,1.value. So that will tell us the release date of any film that we're searching for if it has been found. So once I've done all that, I can step through the routine. Let's see what's the easiest way to do this so you can actually see something happening. So if I begin stepping through the routine, the first thing that will happen is I'm asked for which film I'm looking for. So I'm going to type in the word dark. In fact, I'm going to type it in lowercase letters just to prove that it's still working non-case sensitively. So if I click OK, at that point I'm then going to set my search range, which would be from B3 down to B16 at this point. And then I'm going to search for the word dark and see if it returns a cell. So film cell currently isn't nothing. So it's found something. So then it should print out a message for us, which will tell us that The Dark Knight Rises was released on the 20th of the 7th, 2012. And there it is. There's all the information. So slightly more interesting system, and sort of the basis of a simple user search facility, I guess you could use this for. Of course, it could do with some improvements on top of this, but that's a nice little starting point for you. So we've created a fairly basic system that lets a user search for a single film in the list. But what if we wanted to continue finding all the instances of a word that we've searched for? So for example, if I run this routine again and search for Ted, it will find the first film containing that word, which is The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. But if I wanted to click OK then and find all the other instances of the word Ted in the list, what do I need to do? Well, the answer to that is to use the FindNext method, which is a little bit more tricky to use. It involves quite a lot of tweaking of this code, but let's have a look at how this works. To make this system work, we simply need to carry on looking for the same piece of text after we've displayed the message for the first cell that we found. So let's add a bit of code to the else clause of our if statement. After we've displayed our first message, let's say set film cell equal to search range dot find next. So to begin with, it's actually very, very similar to what we did in the first place to find our first film, except we're using FindNext instead of find. Now you can only use FindNext if you've already used find. FindNext continues a search that has already been begun by the find method. There's one optional parameter of the FindNext method that we need to specify as well, and that's which cell we want to start searching after. Now if we didn't specify this, what would happen is the FindNext method would then immediately just find the same cell that we're looking at. So we need to tell it to continue searching after the one that we're currently on. So we actually pass in the same variable, the film cell variable, to make sure that it searches after the one that we're currently on. Now at that point, all that would happen is that the FindNext method would happen once. It would find the very next instance of the word we're looking for and return that value, or return a reference to that cell to the film cell variable. So we need to make sure that this continues to happen until we stop finding films. So for that reason, we're going to wrap these two lines up inside a loop. And in this example, we're going to use a do while loop. So we write the word do before the message box, and we write the word loop immediately afterwards. I'm just going to indent these 2 or 3 lines to make it a little bit easier to read. So essentially, anything that happens between these 2 lines continues to happen essentially endlessly. In fact, if I were to attempt to continue running this routine, if I start to run it, we should see if I search for Ted, for example, and click OK, then it finds The Hobbit, and then Ted 2, and then Ted, and then I guess Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted, and then click OK, The Hobbit, and Ted 2, and so on. So you can see what the problem is here. It's just going to continue to go around and around and around and around forever. So at this point I'm going to press Control and Break on my keyboard, which will interrupt my code. So that's control and break. Sometimes the key says pause on it, so you can press control and pause or control and break to break into the routine, then just end the routine. So clearly the other thing that we need to make sure that we do is tell the loop to stop looping once it's found all of the instances. And we can do that by applying a condition to the loop line. Now the way that we're going to stop our loop from running is to check whether we've reached the first cell that we found again. So the easiest way to do that is to store the cell reference of the first cell that we find, and then check each time whether we've gone back to that cell. So let's do that by declaring a new variable. Let's say dim first film cell as a string. And what we can do is in our else clause, before we begin the loop, we're going to say first film cell. If I can spell first properly, that would help. First film cell equals film cell dot address. So address is the property of a range which returns the cell reference. In the loop then, we can add a simple condition to the end of the loop. So we can say loop while film cell dot address is not equal to first film cell. So each time we get to the end of the loop, it's going to check whether the new film cell that we've just detected is not equal to the original cell address that we stored. And as long as that's not true, the loop will continue looping. So let's just run this one more time now. If I use the run button just to prove that it will work, first of all, so I'm going to search for Ted again. So I get The Hobbit, and then Ted 2, and then Ted, and then Madagascar, and hopefully at this point when I click OK, we're not going to then see the Hobbit film again. If I use the F8 key to step through this one, hopefully we can see, if I type in a film, I'm going to go for Ted just one more time, and then click OK. I can see that we find the first cell, and I'm going to store the cell reference in this first film cell variable. So hopefully you can just see there that it stores the reference $B$7. So each subsequent time now that it displays a message or finds a new film, it's going to check whether the film cell address, so this time it's B11, which is not equal to B7, meaning it will loop around back to the top and then continue showing the message. And the next film cell is B12, which is not the same as B7, so it continues. And the next film cell is B13, which again is not B7. So the next time, it has actually found again the Hobbit film, so the FindNext method has found the same cell again. But now we're checking that B7 actually is the same as B7, so the loop ends, the if statement ends, and then finally so does the subroutine. So there's the basics of using the FindNext method. Hopefully you found that useful. If you've enjoyed this training video, you can find many more online training resources at www.wiseowl.co.uk.